When you're about to start activity involving personal data processing, make sure you comply with data protection rules and that you can demonstrate it. Those activities can be almost anything, from organizing an event to sending a newsletter or creating a list. For that, you need to document your activity. Why? Because you're a data controller. What, who, and how. What? Personal data. Personal data is any piece of information about a person who is either identified, so we already know who that person is, or identifiable, so we don't know yet who the person is, but with some effort we could learn the person's identity. Who? Data subject. Data subject is a person whose data is being processed. Data controller. Data controller determines the why and how data is going to be processed, what is the purpose and the means. He or she must also ensure compliance with data protection rules and be able to prove it. As a data controller, you must document your processing activities upon personal data. Data processor. Sometimes we hire a company to do something for us. For example, the company that is providing us with aerial surveillance assets and personnel. That third company processes personal data on your behalf, and it's called data processor. How? Complete the record of the processing activity. Perform compliance check to make sure your activity is in line with data protection rules. Submit the record to your DPO, Data Protection Officer. If both data controller and the DPO agree on the record, it is published in the public register. Data controller prepares a privacy statement, also called data protection notice, which tells an individual what happens with his or her data, and it must be made available to them, either on paper or on a web page, or in an email, but always before you start collecting personal data. Sometimes the data you're going to collect, or the means you're going to use to process this data, is more risky for the data subject. For example, you may need to process health data, or the data of vulnerable persons, or use new technologies. In that case, you will need a DPIA, also known as Data Protection Impact Assessment. When do you need to carry out Data Protection Impact Assessment? A process which helps you to identify and minimize the data protection risks of the project. Systematic evaluation made by automated means of personal aspects, including profiling, such as automated evaluation of person's skills. Large-scale processing of special categories of personal data, such as disease surveillance, pharmacovigilance, or central databases for law enforcement cooperation. Systematic monitoring of publicly accessible areas on a large scale via CCTV, or when your activity does not relate to any of the above, but uses new technological means, for example, a cloud. The best way to know whether you're required to run a DPIA is via a threshold assessment, a list of criteria which helps you find out whether DPIA is required and/or by consulting the DPO. Data controller is obliged to demonstrate compliance with data protection rules, and here our DPO can advise on that. Make sure that record, compliance check, DPIA and threshold assessment are regularly reviewed. Attention! It is important to understand that failing to keep records may result in administrative fines against Frontex or in other enforcement measures by the European Data Protection Supervisor. Inform the DPO and notify the European Data Protection Supervisor, also known as EDPS, within 72 hours when personal data breach takes place. If it poses high risk to people, the controller also must communicate it to data subjects. A personal data breach is a security incident that involves personal data. It can be a physical or an electronic incident. For example, when files have been made available to people who were not intended to see them. Make sure you have a written contract in place which includes specific data protection clauses. Every time, a data controller uses data processor to process personal data. Here is the checklist for the data controller. 1. Complete a record and compliance check. 2. Prepare a privacy statement and submit the documents to the DPO. 3. If the DPO has no questions, the record is placed in the public register. Please note that compliance check will not be made public, but it will be kept in DPO's files. 4. Assess if processing activity poses a high risk or not. 5. In case of high risk, prepare the data protection impact assessment. If the results of the assessment are still high, the DPIA is sent to the European Data Protection Supervisor for consultation. Your DPO will advise. 6. Should DPO suspect data subjects are at risk, he or she will request completion of the threshold assessment. Whenever in doubt, seek DPO's advice in time. Write to us at dataprotectionoffice@frontex.europa.eu.